Hi guys. If you've joined before, hopefully you recognise me. My name's Jacob. I am the head of sales here at SEC. Support on a day-to-day basis. I've got about 6-ish years focusing on life science recruitment now. Most of my experience has been within the US actually. I joined SEC in order to build the US function. So probably a lot of the work or what we're going to be talking about today will be more focused towards maybe the US side, but a lot of work doing cell and gene therapy startups, supporting VCs and Ps with building those out from scratch. So yeah, a bit of knowledge when it comes to headhunting talent from competitors.
Yeah, and I am also Jacob Stafford-Wright. I head up the marketing team here at SEC. So I've been working in recruitment marketing for the last 5 years. So really varied role. But a huge chunk of that has been around EVP building, understanding what might make candidates move, and then how that translates to outreach and how that translates to material. So hoping to give you a bit of insight today around candidate engagement, and give you a bit of understanding about how to identify when people might be ready to move, and what the outreach should look like to give you the best shot of engaging the candidates that you want to engage.
Yeah.
So the session is going to be split into 3 today. So we've got kind of around 10 minutes on exactly how to map your competitors, exactly how to identify who's hiring the talent that you want to hire. Then JP is going to speak a little bit about what some of the signals are that people within your competitors for talent are actually going to be receptive to a move. And then the third part is all about outreach, what the outreach should be when you're approaching this kind of talent, maybe some do's and don'ts around candidate experience and messaging candidates, to kind of try and get them engaged with you, and with your company, and what your company mission is and what it stands for. So just before we started the session today, I asked JP if he'd be comfortable if I posed this question to him, and he said yes. And I think it's a really good exercise in, giving you an insight as to how we might approach a search ourselves as a rec agency. So, JP, imagining that you've just been engaged by a startup or a small biotech, and you're doing that initial search into who their competitors are and what who's got the talent that they want to get. What does that search look like for you, and how do you go about identifying who those competitors are?
Yeah. So again, it's going to be quite specific to the company. But most of the time, what we do first is look internally within that business, starting to look at where the C-suite team came from, or the senior leadership team in general come from, and then working our way through, I guess, every layer. If we're working on a research associate or an entry-level position, the majority of the time we'll probably look at where all the other research associates came from, whether that's looking at industry competitors or whether that's looking at specific universities that people might have come from. And then as we get kind of further up, it gives us quite a broad idea of where have they worked before and what was the reason that person moved to this specific client. I think that's really key first. So in order to look externally to bring talent in, you first need to look internally. And specifically looking at that A talent, I think we like to call it, our view, and I think everybody's view whenever they're building a company, is in order to create a high-performing team, you need to make sure that you have an A-star team, and A-star people attract A-star players. So making sure that, again, speaking to the people that have joined your organization and understanding where they've come from and which companies they potentially even like to go back to in the future, or that they had the best experience in, is a great way to start. And then that normally gives you quite a few companies to go after. I think we'll touch on tech in a little bit after this.
But that's an exercise you'd recommend to kind of like to TA people who are working within smaller organizations. If you're making only a few hires a year, gather the information on where those hires are coming from, not just where you're hiring them from, but what does 2, 3, or 4 steps back look like for their career journey, and noticing the patterns within those few steps and from employee to employee, hopefully would indicate, what your competitor kind of pool looks like for talent.
Yeah. And I think especially looking at those people that weren't necessarily a perfect fit when they joined, didn't tick all the boxes, but you've been able to see over the last, period of time that they've been at that business, that there's been positive progress. I think is really important, because we've had so many examples of finding people where, in terms of technical skill set, they might fit exactly what you're looking for, but actually when it comes to personality or traits, they've really struggled to kind of progress within a business. And especially for startups, a lot of the time attitude kind of trumps the technical skill set, especially if you're looking at that kind of mid to lower level, but also with the senior level. They've got to be very hands-on. Their role isn't defined by boxes being ticked, because they need to be flexible and they need to be kind of transparent throughout.
Yeah, something you just said there as well kind of made me think about, you're saying look at your A team, right? Look at your B players as well. But if you are only making a few hires a year, you might not have a huge amount of data to go off as to where you are hiring from. So even if you are only making 2 or 3 hires a year at the moment, you can also look at some of the people who maybe got to offer stage with you, and go back through their career history as well. Because if you are only looking at the people that you're hiring, or are only looking at your A players, and you have, say, only 2 or 3 that you would put into that category, it's probably a good exercise to take a look at anybody that you're also willing to interview, and to say, okay, well, I'm say interviewing 6 people, I'm only going to hire 1 person, but I can see that all of those 6 people have worked at both X company and Y company. I'm going to earmark X and Y company as a potential target in the future.
Yeah.
Something a little bit more kind of marketing-y, I suppose, that we might look at when we're doing kind of competitor analysis, is setting up things like Google Alerts. If you have identified, say, those 8 to 12 companies that that you would definitely hire from, if they are big enough, plugging those into Google, if they're kind of mid to large size, you'll begin to get information about what's going on in those companies to your inbox every morning, every week, whatever you choose, which can be a really good way of keeping tabs on what's going on at competitor companies, and identifying when something might be cool, something might be happening internally at those companies, or something might be happening quite publicly at those companies that might indicate people would be more receptive to hearing about new opportunities, being approached about new roles.
Yeah. And you can start kind of building an idea in terms of what might be popping up through those Google Alerts that creates a reaction within those businesses for people to start leaving. Because, and I think we've touched on it in kind of like previous versions of this, where we said that creating and starting the process of building those talent pools and consistent communication, that's so key, especially when you're starting to build out and trying to poach people from competitors. But actually looking at and creating a correlation between what happens through these Google Alerts and actually how that affects people, both in a positive and a negative way.
Yeah. It gives you
being honest with them and open with them, and asking them the questions, right?
Yeah.
Of what would make you change? Would something significant at your business need to happen in order for you to have a peek outside the door and find different opportunities?
Yeah, even if it isn't an indicator that they would be moving, right? It's still it's still a conversation starter. And if you compare it to how I think a lot of TA people, even a lot of agency recruiters are used to operating, especially if you've got an urgent role on, or you're talking kind of high volume stuff, you might have a list of 100 candidates and you might be sending them all exactly the same message, and people understand when something like that is templated. If you've set up a Google Alert and you can see that there's been a new executive appointment at company, and you use that in order to personalize the outreach to that group of people, even if it is a bulk message, you still give the element of personalization, and it's still gives the illusion that it's me that you want to speak to, and that I'm not just a number on a mailing list.
Yeah,
I'm jumping ahead because I know we're talking a little bit about approach now, but we mentioned there. Okay, so setting up alerts, understanding what's going on in the competitor companies. If you were working a requisition for a client, and you'd be tasked with pulling, headhunting from other startups and similar companies, what would be those indicators that you'd be looking for to start those conversations?
I think, so outside of already creating those talent pools for us, right, where we've already started having those conversations months or years ago, and understanding what the triggers are for people to move. I think, I mean, what have we kind of talked about previously? It's looking at any additional changes, but if we're looking at identifying specific competitors, maybe outside of the people that you've looked at internally, it's tough to say because it's such a small market, but there's so many different routes that you could go down. Like another route that sometimes we look at is, well, who are the VCs or private equity firms that have funded that startup, and what other startups have they invested in? Could we potentially poach other people from their other portfolio companies that we know have a good track record of being able to build high performing teams, or have a really good, I guess, track record in the market as well? Yeah, there's a lot of different routes that we can go down. I mean, again, we have a really good ATS system built over 37 years now. So we know quite a lot in terms of the competitors and where different people go. But yeah,
one of the triggers that, I mean, when we were kind of planning this session and that you spoke to me about last week, that it was kind of something that I hadn't considered before, was when it comes to larger companies and trying to pull talent in from larger companies, if you are an SME, is share price.
Yes.
So you
for senior hires.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're specifically trying to build out your kind of VP level, director level team, you mentioned that was quite a good thing to keep tabs on. Yeah,
definitely. I think, again, most of my experience has been in the US, where, you know, sometimes people need $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 of sign-on bonuses in order to kind of buy them out of shares that they might have or schemes that they have in place. But actually kind of looking at what's happening with share prices, because for some big companies, it might be a case that the share price drops so much within that specific space that they decide to cut that function completely, which creates a little bit of uncertainty, a great time to move someone. It might be a case that actually that person's always been interested in moving to a smaller company where they have less red tape and more opportunity to build something from scratch, rather than inheriting a team or inheriting a process, but they've got golden handcuffs a lot of the time. So seeing that price drop is a really good opportunity to have that conversation, say, look, we can actually financially maybe move you across, all those golden handcuffs are slightly starting to change color a little bit, which is always good fun. Yeah, rusting away.
Yeah. So I mean, it was something that struck me, because I hadn't really considered that either. But you know, a lot of these VP level, director level people, they're going to have share options potentially, and if you're thinking as an SME, I'm never going to be able to compete with that purely from a financial standpoint. I'm never going to be able to give them a package that's going to come up to that level financially for them. If you're noticing that that's starting to falter, it's a great time to begin those conversations, even if it does still seem out of reach, because you never know what other news might impact that share price in the future and cause them to feel uncertainty about being at that company. You know, I think when you're speaking at that level as well, it's often their reputation that's also on the line. Nobody wants to be part of a business that seemed to be not doing so well. People are worried about how that might impact potential employability down the line if you're associated with projects or companies that then go on to not be viable.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing to look at as well is with the larger companies, and I mean, we're talking about like the AstraZenecas, the Novo Nordisk, etc., but understanding which direction their programs are kind of going, which way they're investing their money. Like, you can see which therapeutic areas they're wanting to drive towards, and actually does that neglect an area of their business from additional funding themselves? Which is quite a good push for, again, senior people, but even then dropping down to mid-level and junior candidates to move them out, because less funding, which means that they're less likely to progress, which means that they potentially could be cut in the next 6 to 12 months.
It's massive. There's, like, just talking through all of this, there's so many different indicators that you might be able to look at to paint a picture of okay, if this domino falls because of funding in a particular area, it may then mean that somewhere down the line candidates are going to want to move. There's a huge amount of research that can go into it. If you were to, like, say, you know, what are the indicators? Maybe 2 or 3 top indicators. So things like share price dropping, things like if it's reported that there's been a clinical trial failure.
Yeah.
The key things that you might go, okay, well, for us, that's, you know, shark bait, and where we're absolutely going to speak to those candidates. What would those kind of indicators be?
We're talking about maybe the top 3 ones that we would keep an eye on. I definitely think clinical trials is a massive one, and it's one that for the past 12 to 18 months, I think has been a key area for us. And there's lots of free information out there as well that can notify you of companies that are heading towards clinical trial within certain therapeutic areas. So it's great to be able to connect with people prior to that to suggest, well, if it doesn't go well, would you be interested in a move of maybe restarting the process somewhere else? So that's probably the top one. I think another one that goes really under the radar is leadership change. And I'm not necessarily talking about C-suite. I'm talking all the way down to associate director, because there's a lot of people that might be sticking with a company because their career path is into leadership, but actually as soon as someone joins at an associate director or a senior manager level, they feel like they've just been completely shut off and their progress has been paused.
And there's a couple of different things at play there. Number one, they might feel that they have been overlooked for that position, but number two, they might feel that the management style they've become accustomed to, that they've liked with whoever was that previous position holder, is now under threat, and they might not like the new management style.
Yeah, definitely. So like, I think, again, speaking with a lot of senior leaders and talent acquisition people over the 5-6 years that specifically I've been doing this, everyone's always really excited when they're bringing in senior people, but they never actually review or speak to the people beneath that to understand how comfortable they are with the change. So it's a positive, it's also a negative as well at the same time. So one, clinical trials and investment, I'm going to kind of put that into one. Then we're looking at leadership change. And then I think the final one, which no matter what the cycle of the market we're in, no matter what stage we're at, you know, we're looking at the highs of 2020 and 21, it was mass hiring going on. Well, actually, that was awesome for us because we knew that companies that were going through mass hires, there was a group of people that didn't like that felt that there was more red tape, more reporting structures. It wasn't the exciting, fun environment that it used to be. Great, we can take them out of there. But now, again, for the last 12 to 18 months, where we've gone through this period of layoff after layoff and freezing of kind of growth plans, that's also meant that there's been more people in order to kind of take out and create an uncertainty within those organizations. So both growth and reduction in workforce is also a really good time to start.
Just change ultimately, in it. People don't like change.
People really dislike change. Yeah.
And with the layoffs thing, that's, of course, you have the candidates that have been laid off, but then also you have the people that are maybe feeling uncertain about their own role within that company. And then a third thing to consider is the PR element of some of these companies as well, and how mishandling layoffs has thrown some companies into PR nightmares because of the way that it's been mismanaged or miscommunicated internally. So then you have the third tier of candidates that maybe they are happy in the role, and maybe they are not impacted by layoffs, but maybe they just feel concerned about being associated now with a company that's going through such negative PR because of the way they've handled layoffs in the past.
Yeah. And they're conversations we're having all the time with people. Like even this morning, I was speaking to a VP of a really well-regarded CDMO over in the US who haven't gone through issues in terms of mass layoffs, have been pretty stable in terms of not necessarily growth, but stable with their hiring, comfortable position. But again, because there's potential issues coming up in the near future, already looking at new opportunities and specifically passive opportunities, and specifically through one voice. Luckily enough, it's my voice that he's going to be able to get onto the market. But that's again something that you need to kind of take into consideration.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess, you know, that something to take away from that is that there are people that would consider themselves passively looking and would consider themselves actually being in a pretty good position. So it's going to take something pretty special to move them, but they would still be open to hearing about those things. And, you know, that's when you start to think about long-term relationships and the importance of building long-term relationships with candidates, and not just considering the job that you have now, but hopefully projecting to 6-12 months down the line the jobs that you do need, so that you can begin to try and identify some of those particular cases now.
Definitely.
But something that we were speaking about as well is effective utilization of the toolkits that you might have as a TA person, as a recruiter. I think that when, you know, we see it here, when you're using the same tech day in, day out, you can become fatigued with it a little bit. You can overlook some of the features when you're so used to using it in the same ways. So I think, you know, another bit of advice is to make sure that you're consistently brushing up on the tools that you're using, consistently reviewing the tools that you do have access to. One of the kind of use cases for the LinkedIn product suite, which I think, you know, most TA HR teams that are doing, you know, even 2 or 3 hires in a year are using, is, you know, when you're taking those competitors and you're trying to identify when your target talent pool within a competitor is more susceptible to a move, is to run kind of LinkedIn talent insight searches on those competitor companies. So if I know I've identified company X as a competitor, I might run a company search on LinkedIn talent insights, and it'll tell me exactly what the average tenure is of those candidates. So if I know I'm hiring software developers, for example, from company X, and I say, you know, run a search on LinkedIn talent insights for software developers within company X, and it tells me that they typically stay for 4 years, for example, I'd be able to replicate that search within LinkedIn Recruiter and say, anybody that's at company X that has software development as a skill and has been at the company for 4 years, run me a list of that, and then I can do some targeted outreach to that talent pool as well. I think the point there is kind of just make sure you know how to use the tech that you are using effectively.
Yeah, it's like nowadays, I think it's so different to how hiring used to be even like 4 or 5 years ago, and specifically going about who to headhunt from who. Whether you're like a recruiter, a search firm, whether you're an internal talent acquisition or just a hiring manager trying to do it yourselves, it's easier because there's so much tech, but it's also harder because there's so much tech at the same time, and there's so many different avenues that you can go down. And with, you know, the LinkedIn tech specifically, like you mentioned, if you're not upskilling yourself in it, it's so easy to fall off the wagon and stick to kind of bad and start creating bad habits with it, and you're missing large chunks of incredible talent out there on the market.
And from what I hear from other recruitment marketers in the space, who are with, you know, both in-house and with agencies, the vast majority of people use tools like LinkedIn Recruiter terribly, and they are so used to running terrible searches, and they're so used to, you know, because they think they know how the tool works, and they think that they, you know, if you've made successful hires from somewhere like LinkedIn Recruiter before, you think you know the formula and you don't think you need to deviate from it. You do. And if you take the time to do even a little bit of upskilling, you're probably going to put yourself in a better position than 90% of other TA people out there who have been using it in exactly the same way for the length of time that they've been using it. Most people with any tech, I think, train themselves on how to do it once and go through, you know, one set of formal training, and then don't revisit it because they don't feel the need to. And if you're having some success from it, it might not be apparent that you might need to be continually upskilling yourselves on it. But I think, I mean, I know that you have had conversations even with our own team about the best ways of running searches, and you know, continually training the guys and making sure that they understand every single aspect of the platforms that we're using across our tech stack, as and when those bits of tech are updated.
Yeah, 100%. And it's, this is why, like, I really love working with startups and scale ups, I'd call them as well, because normally the person that you're working with, the TA or the HR, they've got so many different jobs that they need to be working on, and they've also got to look at, you know, potentially branding and utilizing their software, making sure the people that are already within the organization are doing well and what their progression looks like, and make sure everyone's happy, so that when they're then trying to build out and bring on people, they normally don't have enough time to upskill themselves and have that support structure in place to say, well, what does a really good search look like? What does a Boolean search look like? How can we adjust it so that you can find the right people? So yeah, there's 101 different things that they've got to be thinking, and hats off to them. There's a lot to be doing all the time.
And I think, we've just said that you might think that your sourcing strategies are working for you because you are making those hires and you are, you're getting the desired end result potentially. But it's a good idea to identify the metrics that are indicating that you're doing it in the most efficient way. So obviously a big thing for us is looking at ratios. How many candidates are we approaching compared to how many candidates are we putting through to interview? How many candidates are we interviewing and screening? How many are our clients interviewing and screening? And then how many of those are progressing to further stages? This seems like really obvious stuff, but I think that if you are a one-man band or if you're a couple of people working within a smaller company, you might not be looking at these because you might be thinking, oh, well, the end result is there and we're making the hires that we want to make. It's a really good exercise, quarterly, maybe twice a year, to take a look. Okay, well, how much effort am I exuding to get to that end result? Are the ratios and the time that I'm spending in the in-between parts as tight as they can be?
Yeah, and asking for help, I think, is like a major thing, because if you're not upskilling yourself is part of it, but you've also got to make sure that if you're part of a startup and you need these hires, every hire matters more than maybe a large company does in terms of those hires. So you can't afford to screw it up really in terms of that hire, because they might be a key figure within the business that builds a team. Or if that person is not correct, they're going to create a poor team as well. And then like we've worked with a startup, for example, that had so much money to play with, and they burnt through millions, even in terms of internal hiring, but their senior leadership team was so poor that they just weren't able to then progress and get their product through the stages that they needed to get to.
And then we're kind of back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of bad PR, making it bad for you to be able to hire them in the future. Your reputation's kind of been tarnished a little bit, and turning that around from a EVP marketing perspective is a difficult job once you've got that name out there. And we've also worked with clients that have tried to do exactly that and recognize that they do have a negative perception to overcome, and they're interested in what it's going to take to be able to turn the reputation of an employer around in the market.
It's like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, with PR firms trying to correct your image. Well, start with the simple thing of starting your recruitment process correct, making sure that you're hiring the right people, so that that person knows 3 other people in the industry, and those 3 people know 3 other people. So it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's all down to how well and effective you can create your hiring strategy, create your recruitment strategy, and get your EVP up and running.
So
we've digressed quite a
lot. We've digressed a little bit, but hopefully useful information. But back to kind of like the competitor side of it, and in this scenario, if you've just been given a role, you've identified the competitors. Okay, we've identified that some of your competitor companies have gone through executive leadership changes. Some of them have gone through potentially poor clinical trial results have been released. Let's talk a bit about what the approach is to those candidates now. So you have a list of target candidates. Potentially these are companies that are going through changes that they might indicate they're more receptive. How would you go about doing that approach?
Old school, phone first, I think, is the approach that we do. And it's easier for us to do, right? Because we don't have a name, a biotech or a pharma attached to us. We're able to actively go out. So cold calling straight away. Just try to start a conversation with them. We're not trying to sell anything from day one. We're not trying to push a company towards them from day one or a role. We're just trying to understand what their push and pull factors are. If we can identify what those are, then we're able to move forward, and again, utilizing tech in order to gain access to the right mobile numbers, for example. I think it's pretty easy for us to do that nowadays. But even being quite aggressive and phoning them up at their work, I know some people do frown upon that, but I'm sorry if you're utilizing me in order to find an A-star player, I'm going to do what I can to get that A-star player on the phone to at least understand what their motivations are.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well. Like you make the conversation about them. I think, you know, when the team are asking me if they're you know, if they're coming to me and they're saying, you know, I've approached 200 candidates about this role that I'm trying to work for a client. Why are none of the candidates coming back to me? Why are my response rates so low? Usually we'll take a look at what that outreach has looked like, and it will be, I am working on a role for a client. It's a really important client. It's a really, really urgent role. But ultimately the person on the other end of that message doesn't care if it's a really important role. It's not an urgent role for them. They're sat potentially doing the job that they are happy in. You have to make it about them, and you have to make it about their motivations and put them at the center of the process, and not think about, I've got a role and it's really urgent that I get this filled by the end of the month.
Yeah, and unless you're on, again, from a recruitment perspective, if you're on a retained or a contained search for a client, realistically, you're probably working a very similar role with another client anyway. So going after them with one role, one doesn't make logical sense for us internally, but it's the worst way to build a relationship. You don't start off by trying to push roles towards them and kind of get them just to send a CV across and send it. You want to build personal relationships. You never know where that conversation is going to go in the future. It could lead to a new client potentially, or some more information that really helps you in terms of referral. Or
if you were to kind of like equate this process, the candidate engagement process, to the say a traditional sales funnel, that first call would be about identifying pain points and identifying
100%.
need, identifying buyer need. Nobody is 100% happy in their role.
Yeah.
So your job in that first call is to identify what would make them 100%, what is missing in their current role. And that's when you then identify whether there's an alignment with what you're able to offer as a TA person with a role to fill.
Definitely. And, you know, we talk about internally, and I train my guys on the basis of different levers of motivations for people, and being able to identify one or two or three of those levers from the get-go really helps you to understand, okay, is this person the right person moving forward? It's great getting applicants through, right? But at the end of the day, the applicants are people that are sometimes a little bit difficult to understand what their motivations are. It might just be salary, which is, it's not a motivator, right? Because $5,000 somewhere else means that their head's going to get turned again. So being able to understand those push and pull factors nice and early and create meaningful conversations is going to help massively.
It's not only a benefit to you either, it just is good for candidate experience. You know, it's me as a candidate, I'm going to feel like you really care about what I want. I'm going to feel like you're representing me and you're not representing the client, and you're not just trying to fill your role. You know, you're actually taking the time to understand what it is that's going to be a fit for me, and not trying to shove me a square peg in your round hole.
And it just makes it easier, right? Because that motivation and what they're looking for might not be right for you as the TA within that startup or that company right now, but in 6 months' time, at least you've started that conversation, you understand what it is. In 6 to 12 months, that might be the perfect reason for someone to join the business. It might be about, you know, leadership opportunities. Well, actually the role right now isn't, but in 6 months' time, we think there's going to be an opportunity there. I've already identified the perfect person. I now just need to get a sequence going in continuous conversation so that at that 6-month mark, I'm ready to pull the trigger and we can bring them on board.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've spoken about that before in terms of like the importance of follow-ups and the importance of making sure that you're actually keeping tabs on people within the network that you think are great candidates but might not be a good fit for today. So coming back to kind of like the startup versus big corporate life, and maybe some of the propositions that might be appealing to somebody if they are moving to a startup. I mean, earlier on you spoke about things like red tape and using that as a motivator for people potentially. You know, if you move from a corporate to a startup, you can typically have more decision-making power, for example, less red tape. Are there any other of those selling points that you know have brought people from larger firms to SMEs in the past?
I think working on exciting tech is always something really interesting in our space that a lot of people are drawn to. And a lot of the time, the smaller companies are working on sometimes more exciting technology or therapeutic areas than larger companies are. Getting to work cross-functionally, I think, is massive as well in terms of bringing people across, especially at that mid-level and the senior level, being part of every single process within the business. That's positive. It's also a negative, because if people haven't experienced it before, they're being dragged all over the place, potentially overworked, tired, unhappy, then they move on, which creates holes in the business. Yeah, I think those are probably the major points.
Yeah.
A lot of the time in terms of bringing people over, and I think just clear career progression.
Yeah.
And not necessarily on years of experience, but actually based on competency level, I think is really, really key. If you can show examples of someone joining your business that might not have been, again, that perfect 10 out of 10 candidate, but you're able to show what you did in order to support them in order to gain more experience. What's the phrase? If you're not learning and you're not earning, then people normally start to kind of look around. So if you're able to show ways in which they can learn within your business and how you can support them and nurture them and get them to their final goal, their kind of North Star that they're looking for, that's such an easy sell to any candidate. And I think more importantly of kind of the positives of your business, right, in terms of attracting people, I think being transparent from day one of like the negative things that have happened within the business or that you foresee coming up in the future. Because if you're bringing in a senior hire or anyone important into a small environment, if that person leaves because you weren't honest about an issue coming up, it leaves a massive hole within the business, which then results in more people trying to plug the gap, which then normally leads to burnout, which then leads to them moving on to another. And all of a sudden you've gone from fantastic team of 20 down to a team of 17, which then goes to a team of 12, which we've seen time and time again. So yeah, transparency, but that's a positive of small companies.
Yeah, it can be difficult. I think, if you're competing for talent against larger firms, usually they've got big budgets, usually they can offer a lot. I think it can seem like an impossible task to be able to really compete with them, like certainly from a financial standpoint. So you have to kind of get creative, I suppose, to understand what's going to engage candidates. I think something that we've considered in the past is when you're branding up your offering and when you're trying to package up what might be appealing to candidates, is to put the people that are at the helm of the business, the co-founders, the people that are up at C-level, put them front and center and get people to buy into their stories and buy into their successes. I think if you're let's not say that there isn't an element of risk that comes with joining an SME and a startup, and that, as you just said, you don't want to be shy about the fact that there is potentially risk there. How to negate that is look at the experience of the people that are behind the company and position that front and center, where you might have gaps where large companies can offer brilliant packages with huge budgets and a lot to play with financially.
Yeah, and I feel like the majority of the time with the startups, and especially over the last 12 to 18 months, right, because everyone's being quite cautious when it comes to funding and investing into these businesses. When they do receive funding or they do come out of stealth mode, they normally have a really good C-suite team or a senior leadership team or back office team with them.
Yeah.
So being able to highlight or put a spotlight on those people about their experiences, what they've done with previous companies and how exciting it is.
Yeah.
I think it's so key in order to attract the right type of people that are thinking, yeah, you know what, it is a bit of a risk. They've been open about it, but I'm all in. Let's see where this journey takes me.
Yeah, I think it is a really key thing, and it's something that we often see when we're doing research as to being like delegated onto a meet the team page on a website and not necessarily pushed front and center as a major part of why people would want to join, and something that we should really be building messaging around. Speaking about things like personal branding and stuff, I think what we've discussed a lot a lot, like with some of the clients that we've spoken about working with, and that we've wanted to position, even though they are smaller, is to start with the people at C-suite, start with founders, pick a face of the organization that maybe people know already, maybe have existing networks and have historic successes that you can tap into for messaging, and begin with personal branding for them, and not necessarily branding yourselves as a business. We say it all the time, people buy from people, people are sold on people's stories compared to being sold on a brand story, for example. So if you are going to go down the route of things like personal branding, that's where you should start. And I think when you're, certainly when you're trying to target senior people, those are going to be the questions that senior people are asking anyway. Who is at the helm of this ship, and who is guiding the company?
Yeah, I agree with that one. I also think what people always forget, especially with senior hires, is they're really interested where the money's coming from and who those VC or PEs that have invested into those companies, what they've done historically. I think that's so key for again, VP C-suite level, is just being really clear and transparent in terms of where the money's come from, what the VC's done previously with that money. Have they got any example of other portfolio companies that they've taken from, stage A to stage C, for example, and actually what the run looks like. How much money do they have, but how are they looking to use that money and spend that money, and what does the longevity of the business look like? What do they need to achieve, and what do you joining the business have to achieve in order to get from C to Series A, then Series A to Series B, and what the growth looks like there. I think, again, a lot of people forget about that, but it's so key. If they're taking the risk of joining from a large pharma, they need to make sure that they are as clear as day in terms of what the next steps look like.
Yeah, I think that there is a certain level, and this isn't something that I've come up with. It was something that I saw online, TikTok. I saw on TikTok. Something that I saw, and it was there comes a point when senior candidates are no longer looking for an employer, they're looking for a long-term client. So they want to know what the trajectory is, and they want to know that they essentially have the longevity at the firm and can look at this new opportunity as being a long-term client, of this company. So I think, certainly having things mapped out, certainly having that long-term vision appeals to people at that level.
And if you don't, stop, get it done before, because there's nothing worse than trying to collate as much information and create a path to throw at someone in order to entice them to accept an offer, compared to having it laid out from the get-go so that everybody's happy and that there's no additional information they need in order to make a decision.
Yeah. Just I think final point on this section, and it was something that we've spoken about earlier, was personal branding. I wanted to share an anecdote around personal branding. We've worked with a TA in the past who had a huge amount of experience recruiting in one specific niche throughout their whole career, right? And they'd spent their whole career building up a first degree network on LinkedIn and never communicating with them. It's a huge missed opportunity. Essentially, there was a point when they decided, okay, I'm going to put some effort into personal branding. I'm gonna begin posting. Not spending huge amounts of time on it, but doing it 2-3 times a week, and essentially trying to get something from the network that I've been spending so long building. And I'm sure there'll be people that are watching this that are in that same position where, maybe they've been recruiting in the same space for X amount of years. They've been, making sure to grow their first degree network, and they, it's essentially an untapped audience at the moment. With this specific case, it made such a difference to their end results of being able to generate warm calls for them when they did start personal branding. And it can seem like such a huge concept, and it is personal branding, but even just starting by posting 2 or 3 times a week about you know, maybe it is your co-founders, maybe it's something that you've got going on internally. You know, if you don't have roles, you can think of other aspects of things to talk about beyond just what you're hiring for. But the difference this made to their ability to generate inbound attention for themselves and for the company was, you know, it was night and day. Looking at kind of we had access to the profile analytics. It was, you know, it was a huge spike when they began posting about the inbound attention that they got to the LinkedIn profile. And obviously you can see who's viewing your profile, and then that becomes a potential lead list of candidates who might be interested in your company, might not, but you know you already have a conversation starter because they've engaged with you in some kind of way.
Yeah. What are your views actually on, with the branding element, let's take LinkedIn, for example, of someone in talent acquisition or HR or anyone actually within a business actively liking and commenting on competitors' posts?
Yeah, I've seen it happen. I mean, I think we've seen it happen in our space where we've had people from outside, you know, outside of SEC, you know, recruitment is a really competitive space. So they've done it to potential our potential high performers. I would say it's the mark of a good and persistent talent acquisition person. I think that posting is one thing, right? But building, you know, if you would talk about personal branding as a concept, it goes beyond just, you know, one way throwing things out there. When I think about, and I'm sure that, you know, when you think about personal branding on LinkedIn, when I think about the 2 or 3 people that I see continuously on LinkedIn, it's not necessarily their original post that I'm seeing, but it is the comments that they're leaving on other people's profiles. So I would say it's a good thing to do. It's a pretty gutsy thing to do, but if the ultimate goal for you as a TA person is to be known by the talent that you're trying to hire, I would say that's a great way of getting known by the talent you're trying to hire. And if you are commenting, if your competitor is company X and you're commenting on the posts that company X employees are leaving, potentially the people are sat in the office at company X and they're going, oh, hey, you know, this TA person from this company is just commenting on my post. Potentially you're actually starting a conversation about your company directly within enemy lines. Yeah. So it's you know, we've seen it done, but we've both seen it done where TA people have done that. But I think that the ones that I'm thinking of in my head are the ones that I know when I'm thinking, okay, who is a TA person? It's X, Y, and Z person. They've built a great personal brand for themselves. They're always active. They're always commenting on things. It sounds like it's a huge task as well, but it's like, it could be 10, 15 minutes a day.
Yeah,
I won't delve into the data, but there's some stuff around like commenting actually doing more for your personal brand than posting, just posting out there. And you're actually engaging with people as well. So I guess it's a good thing from that aspect. You're not just standing there with a megaphone saying, I've got something to say.
Yeah.
You're actually, you know, commenting on what somebody else is saying.
Interesting. I thought I'd ask you a question. It's been messy.
Yeah, very well said. Cool. I think that kind of wraps it up. I think we've got 10 minutes left. If anybody has any questions or wants to delve back into anything that we've spoken about, that'll be the time. We've got Holly in the room.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, Holly. Yeah, we have a couple of questions. So the first question is, what if my competitors are so small they don't really come up in the news, so wouldn't have a Google alert? What do I do then?
Yeah, as I said, it would only, the things like they think about Google alerts is they have to be kind of big enough for them to be written about in publication or anything. What Google alerts does is it pulls in the news from various news sites. But if you're working with a company, if your competitors are a company that's too small to be in the news, then ultimately the goal with that is just to understand what's going on within their organization and to use that as a starting block for conversation. So if they're active on LinkedIn, what you could do is subscribe to their LinkedIn update. So on every company page, you've got one of those little bell icons and you can hit that and you'll start receiving notifications whenever they post something. And then that at least gives you some ammunition to start a conversation. But, you know, I think it's about however you monitor what's going on. you know, you can also do that over the phone by speaking to those candidates directly.
Connect with everyone.
Connecting with people, yeah.
Because most of the time, right, if they're starting up an organisation themselves, they're probably trying to create some publicity around it because they want to attract talent themselves, but also potentially get more funding or get some kind of insights or just a spotlight on them, right? So if you connect with as many people as you possibly can do within those businesses, the likelihood is that your feed will start populating with any news or anything happening within their business.
Yeah.
Cool, and then we've got one more, and this says, I work in HR and we've been looking into what motivates our employees already, but what should I do if I find that their motivators aren't things that we can fully meet?
That's a good one.
If I was going to be cynical there, I would say you need to address what your motivators are. Otherwise, you might be in danger of losing people that you've got there at the moment. If you've got employees, that are saying that they're motivated by one thing and it's a pattern that you can't meet those motivators, that would raise concerns around their likelihood to stay at the organization. I don't know. That doesn't help because that just says you need to maybe assess what you're able to offer. But JP?
I think it really depends. Like if you're seeing that 80% of the people that are replying to that, their motivations are X and you're only offering Y, well, what can you do as a senior leadership team, for example, to say, how do we get to X, right? And change our Y to an X.
And it's great that you have the data because you've got something to go with and something to pitch on.
100%. I think, cynical me is going to say, probably start looking for people just in case as backups.
Yeah.
Which is always tough to do, right? But you got to make sure that the machine is always working to an extent.
Yeah. It's a difficult one. You know, if you categorically, I suppose it would help to know what those kind of offerings were, but you need to kind of think of a middle ground. You know, if people are motivated by, if all of your employees are saying that they're motivated by work-life balance and you categorically cannot offer any work-life balance, you need to think about what you can offer as a middle ground.
It depends on the size of the organization as well, because having honest, transparent conversations with them to say, look, this is what you guys want, but this is what we can find in that middle ground is really key.
And making sure people know why as well.
Yes.
Like, not this is just the decision that's been made and everybody has to go with it. Potentially that could be, dispel some upset about the things you're not able to offer if you actually rationalize it and say, this is what's gone into making that decision. Hopefully that gives you hopefully that softens the blow a little bit of us not being able to offer it.
Yeah, if they're being honest with you, be honest with them back. Otherwise use a headhunting agency and let them do a bit of an internal review on all your candidates.
That's a wonderful point to end on, JP.
Just plugging us in there quickly.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else, Holly?
No, that's it. There's no other questions.
All right. Well, I think that leaves us at a clean, well, almost clean, 5 minutes left. So, guys, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. After this session, you'll receive a survey that just asks you about the session, about what we spoke about, and importantly, what other topics you'd like to understand and maybe get an agency's perspective on. So if you could fill that out, that'd be really helpful. JP?
Nothing from me. Just if anyone needs any help, let us know, no matter what it is, right?
Yeah.
We're here to help as much as possible.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Cool. Thank you.